Hey friends, we could argue until the cows come home about which autoimmune disease diet is best, which protocol works. And here's the thing, we're going to get to the bottom of that today and start talking about facts. I'm Audrey Christie, holistic wellness practitioner. I've helped hundreds of women find relief and remission from their chronic disease or autoimmune condition. So if that topic interests you, be sure and subscribe and click the bell so you get all the notifications when I put out new content each week. Here's the thing. Which diet is best, right? How do you know? Is it the paleo diet? Is it a keto diet? Is it a vegan diet? Is it, the basic anti-inflammatory diet? Here's the thing. I've got some news for you. The answer to that is yes. Any of those could be right for you or someone else. The problem is that they're not all right for all people. And that's where we tend to go wrong. It's that darn bio-individuality, right? That piece in your body that says you are unique as well as your root cause and disease process. So let's dig in to some of the things that we actually know, some facts about things that you should avoid and things that you should include if you're suffering from an autoimmune disease or chronic illness. Now, we're going to talk specifics when we go into each of the separate autoimmune conditions coming up in the coming weeks. So we're going to talk about psoriasis and rheumatoid arthritis and all of those things. So here's what we know for sure. In order to find relief and remission, we have to optimize what goes into our body. And it's not just what you put in your body. That's one piece of it for sure. But the other piece of it is what you can assimilate and then what you can eliminate, right? Those are several pieces of the path from a dietary or nutrition standpoint. It's not just about the food that you put in your body, but also how your body assimilates or put those nutrients to use, and then how your body eliminates or get rid of the waste as well. And the way you go about this is a little bit different for everyone. But we do know a few things, non-negotiably, nutrition-wise. We're going to talk about them today. The first one is gluten. Now, if you don't know what gluten is, and sometimes people don't, gluten is a group of proteins that's often found or is found in grains. It makes about 75 to 85% of the protein content in wheat, but you can also find it in lots of wheat-related products like spelt and einkorn and barley and rye and malt, oats, as well as any product that's derived from these grains. So things like breads and malts. And it's kind of sad these days with modern food manufacturing, you can bet that many things, even things that shouldn't have gluten in them, actually do, unless they're specifically labeled as certified gluten-free. And so this includes things like shampoos and conditioners and topical products, as well as food. Now you might be wondering, why would they put gluten in my shampoo? It's a really inexpensive byproduct used to fill and thicken a lot of different products. So I firmly believe that science indicates that no one, absolutely no one, should be consuming gluten, just like no one should smoke or drink soda. It's especially important to stop eating gluten, stop consuming gluten topically and internally if you're suffering from an autoimmune disease or if you have an occasional autoimmune dynamic. You can learn more about the science of gluten, and I go really in depth to that in episode 077. I'll link that in the description below if you want to dive deep on that topic. But for our purposes here, I just want to talk about one itty bitty study. It's from Harvard in 2015. For this study, Harvard took 4 groups of people. Group 1 were people that were recently diagnosed with celiac disease. So they're super inflamed people. Group 2 was full of people that had been diagnosed with celiac but had been on a gluten-free diet for an extended period of time. They were at least 1 year in remission on a gluten-free diet. Group 3 were people with non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So they're people that had come to the Harvard clinic and said, you know what, I think gluten might be a trigger for me, but they did not test positive for celiac disease. And then group 4 were people that said, gluten doesn't bother me. It's fine. I can eat all the gluten that I want. They said they had no issue with gluten at all. They took all 4 groups and exposed them to alpha-gliadin. Alpha-gliadin is the scientific name for one of the proteins found in gluten. And can you guess what they found? In all 4 groups, every single person in all the groups developed intestinal permeability, or that leaky gut. And they didn't just develop it, it occurred within the first 5 minutes. 5 minutes, guys. Interestingly, and as a side note, I usually talk about animal studies and how they do or do not correlate to humans. In this case, they also duplicated this study in animals. So make sure if you have cats and dogs, you're not feeding gluten to them either. They're not built for it, just like humans aren't. Now, if you remember when we talked about the causes of autoimmune disease or the triggers, and I'll also link that video below, you know that one of the main ingredients in that recipe for autoimmune dynamic, or what I was calling the autoimmune soup, one of the main ingredients was leaky gut. And so can you kind of connect the dots here, right? Anyone who has chronic or even occasional autoimmune activation really needs to be eliminating gluten 100% from their diet. So if you're gluten-free already, comment GF in the description below. If you're not, no worries. I've linked an easy peasy guide to follow down in the description for going gluten-free. It's a free download. You just grab it and read it and let me know if you have questions. Sometimes clients will say to me, yes, I'm gluten-free. I avoid gluten 90% of the time. Or I'm gluten-free, except for on Tuesdays when I have pizza and beer. And here's the thing. Having a little bit of gluten, especially if you're in a chronic autoimmune state, is like being a little bit pregnant. You can't eat a little bit of gluten. It just doesn't work that way. But people often think that because we're in this diet culture-y society, right, where if you reduce your calories, you're doing a lot better. And so people tend to think that reduction of gluten is as good as elimination, and it just doesn't work that way, right? You can't be a little bit pregnant. You can't have a little bit of gluten. It can't be in your food or your lipstick or your shampoo or your face wash or your moisturizer or your supplements. And, you may think that your products are safe, but unless they say gluten-free, they're likely not. So you do have to do your due diligence and read the labels. And I'm including a free download also in the description of hidden gluten additives to watch for, because food manufacturers, like the sneaky people they are, they don't just put this has gluten in it. So you got to know and research a little bit to find out what certain additives are. So in my practice, working with clients, getting rid of gluten is one of the handful of non-negotiables. And the reason is, I've seen over and over and over again, science tells us, anecdotally I've seen, that you can't really see what's going on in the body with that constant level of inflammation. So you have to clear those muddy waters, right? You can't see through muddy water. You have to clear those muddy waters, get rid of that constant inflammation, and then you can find the rest of the roots for an autoimmune condition. So, number one, gluten. Number two, processed foods. And this can be a little bit confusing. Sometimes clients hear me say, you need to cut back or get rid of processed foods. And they push back a little bit because it's hard to make changes. And I get it. And they'll say, well, all food is processed. And they're not wrong. Even if you grow it in your own garden, if you pull it from the ground, you pull a carrot from the ground, you take it inside and you wash it, technically, if you're being real technical, that has been processed, right? So when I say you need to give up or reduce your processed foods, in a more specific way, I'm looking for you to eat foods that are as unprocessed as possible. You see, the goal in an autoimmune diet is to find remission and relief from autoimmune disease. And to do that, you have to reduce the inflammation. And this means that if you're eating things that are made shelf stable for any length of time, then they're full of additives. They're full of hydrogenated and spoiled oils. They're full of highly processed sugars and other ingredients that cause and create inflammation in the body. Now, that doesn't mean you can never have potato chips or a snack from a package, but it does mean that you should turn that package over and really read the ingredients, and don't eat it if you don't recognize something on the page or if you recognize something as directly inflammatory. So it also means that you want to shop whole food items as much as possible. Not Whole Foods the store. You can find Whole Foods in any grocery store. Spend as much time as possible shopping that perimeter of the store and spend the majority of the time buying fresh produce. Now, that leads us to number 3 for the autoimmune disease diet, right? And that is plant-based. Now, when you're thinking of terms of reducing inflammation and eating an autoimmune diet or a diet that is designed to best find relief and remission for autoimmune disease, you want to think in terms of eating as many plants as possible. Now, I'm not suggesting you become vegan unless you want to. In fact, I don't even like the V word, right? Because it has all this political energy attached to it. And I'm not suggesting you never consume meat, dairy, or eggs again. Although many people in an autoimmune diet find that dairy and eggs are triggers. In fact, they're one of the top 7 triggers for autoimmune flare-ups, right? And so sometimes for people, that's part of their root cause. My family does not eat dairy or eggs because we have 2 autoimmune people in the family, and it's triggers, right? And so we can't do that anymore. What I am suggesting is that you think in terms of your plate, or when you think in terms of your plate, as you sit down for a meal, you think, how many plants can I fit on this plate? It could be cooked plants, it could be raw plants, it could be a salad, it could be broccoli, it could be carrots, it could be potatoes even, although you want to have some things other than starchy potatoes, but you can have a big portion of that filled up by potatoes. But before you think of adding any meat, and regardless of where you land on your compassion or lack of compassion for animals, that's not what this is about. Science tells us that the more plants that you eat, the more vitamins and minerals and nutrients, and the healthier your gut microbiome is. A healthy gut microbiome is a big step towards finding relief and remission from your autoimmune disease. The last thing we're going to talk about today is stress. And I know you're like, wait, Audrey, you said autoimmune disease diet. And I did, but your diet is not just what you put in your mouth, right? It's also what you ingest by the people around you, by your habits, by what you watch, by the situations that you're in. And I do talk a lot about stress because, as I said previously, nutrition is only one leg of the three-legged stool that you need to balance in order to be your full expression of wellness. So stress can be a very, very good thing when it enables your body to survive for another day, like avoiding a dangerous predator, for example. Or the other day when I was out jogging pre-dawn and there was a skunk, stress allowed me to turn and run and avoid being sprayed by that skunk, thankfully. But let's be honest, if you're thinking in terms of your goals or metrics to measure your life by, do you really want it to be, well, I didn't die today, that be your metric by which you're evaluating your entire life? Probably not. So it's really important for the physiology in a human suit to lift ourselves out of that perpetual state of fight or flight that I talk about so often. And now there are lots and lots of things you can do to burn off stress, right? You can exercise, you can eat, you can drink, you can have sex, you can do all of those things. But with an autoimmune disease or any critical illness, it is important to de-stress, but it's also really, really important to de-excite your nervous system. And those are two different things. My favorite tool for this is a healthy dose of meditation. And before you push back and say that you don't have time to meditate, let me just go ahead and squash that, because statistically, people gain 6 to 10 more times productivity by spending 30 minutes a day sitting right on their butts in meditation. And that's just one of the benefits. In specific relation to autoimmune disease, the immune system can be activated or overactivated by so many different things. We've been talking about that over the last few episodes. Viruses, bacteria, even overproduction of mutated cells, right? Mitigating and handling your stress response changes your life and your health. And it's one thing that you can control. It's one thing that you can change. It literally rewires your brain, calms your nervous system, and it actually creates new neural pathways through a process called neuroplasticity. And they've proved this over and over and over again with brain scans. It actually starts to actively lower that adrenaline, that cortisol, those stress hormones that we were talking about. It lowers your heart rate, your blood pressure, decreases your total body-wide systemic inflammation. That's really, really critical for those suffering from an autoimmune disease or even a chronic illness that isn't classified as an autoimmune disease. So learning to mitigate your stress using a tool like meditation, actually promotes healing on a deep cellular level. If you've ever meditated before, drop a comment below. Give me a thumbs up or a yes. So here's some food for thought. And I want you to listen. There's no such thing as a stressful situation. Only stressful responses to a given situation. And I'm not sure who said that first or if I said it exactly correctly, but it illustrates the point. The stress is not what happens to you. Stress is your response of what happens to you. So when you begin to meditate and de-excite that nervous system, you really allow that stress response to go away. I'll dive deeper in the how-tos of how to meditate, how to mitigate stress, and all of those things as we move into November. But today, I want you to know that mitigating stress, and specifically the stress response, is a really critical way to finding remission. I'll link a little download, a meditation download I did many, many years ago, but it's still really valid now. And so that you can sort of dip your toes in and get your toes wet in meditation. And I'll put that in the description below. So to wrap this up, if you are suffering from an occasional or chronic or constant autoimmune disease dynamic, you really need to implement a whole new set of priorities, or an expanded set of priorities really, on food choices and what we consume, recalling that autoimmune disease is not just about food. We've got to protect that precious gut lining because it's the gateway to a lot of chronic inflammatory diseases, not just autoimmune disease. So we're kicking gluten to the curb, right? We're digging deep and being mindful of what ingredients are in those products that we put in and on our bodies every single day. We're putting together a toolbox of ways to mitigate stress, and I have that stress toolbox linked below. One last question for you. Did you find something useful in here today? Are you ready to make a change? Check out the poll in the card and let me know. And then thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Make sure you give me a thumbs up if you found this useful, and give me a thumbs down if you didn't. That's okay too. I'd love for you to hang out with me in my wellness circle. I'll link it below. It's a private Facebook group full of a few hundred, close to 600 crunchy people just like yourself that they're like-minded people, and we love to interact and ask questions, and I do special little classes in there. I have the link in the description for you. And if you want to learn more about finding relief and remission from chronic disease and autoimmune disorders, be sure that you subscribe and click the little bell to make sure you get the notifications and don't miss any of the upcoming information each week. If you know someone that would benefit from this info, be sure and share it. I would be oh so grateful. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Be well.